From PMI's office in Newtown Square, this is PMI Chapter News. In today's top stories, we will explore PMI's chapter governance framework and the fiduciary responsibilities that comprise the chapter's legal requirements to PMI and its members. We will investigate the use and processes for key governance documents, legal policies, and agreements for PMI chapters. We will examine the importance of delivering member value in accordance with the catalog of core and extended services. And we will hear about the value and implementation of key policies, including nomination and election policies, financial policies, and the proper adherence to PMI's Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. Stay tuned for these, as well as others that could make or break success as a chapter leader. Welcome to this special edition discussing the essentials of chapter management with our anchors Alex Brock and Hudson Briggs, our own top chef Winston Piccola, our meteorologist Gregory Rains, and our sports anchors Rufus Bear Garrison and Duffy Parson reporting. We cover breaking news, important developments, and the board trends that matter the most to you. Hello, I'm your anchor, Alex Brock. And I'm Hudson Briggs, PMI Chapter News Correspondent. Welcome to this news program. This broadcast features real-world chapter board leader issues presented by fictional characters and fictional stories. The stories you're about to hear are plausible and could happen to you. On to our top story. What is governance? Well, governance refers to the process of governing, including the interaction and decision-making among all those involved. Governing documents provide the necessary guidance for board members to fulfill their responsibilities to chapter members who have elected the board to manage the chapter on their behalf. As a chapter leader, governance is your responsibility to be aware, understand the policies, and to commit yourself to adhering to them. Today's guest, Beatrice Heitler-Clevens, has spent years researching nonprofit board management and its impact on associations and its members. She currently heads up an international nonprofit working to strengthen association board leadership called Springboard. Welcome, Beatrice.
Thank you. I'm excited to be joining you today.
Now you've been traveling nonstop investigating association board leadership. What would you say has been the most profound discovery for you?
While boards may be of various sizes and locations, they usually consist of passionate individuals who are committed to advancing the profession, and they've all faced similar challenges and opportunities.
What are some observations you can share about what successful boards have in common?
Not surprisingly, successful boards have well-written chapter governance documents to provide them with the guidance needed for effective chapter management. These documents represent the very foundation of the organization and the basis for everything the chapter does.
Did you identify any other competencies these successful boards shared?
Oh, absolutely. Successful boards think strategically as well as operationally. They create and advance member value, and they identify, inspire, and develop future generations of chapter leaders.
So, what would you say, as an expert, are the board members' primary responsibilities?
Well, a board member has certain fiduciary responsibilities. A fiduciary duty represents the highest standard.
So what are our board's members' fiduciary duties?
Well, there are four: a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, and duty of integrity. In terms of duty of care, a board member has the responsibility to be informed and prepare at all times to contribute, to exercise reasonable skill and diligence, and to maintain confidences that are shared with them. They have a responsibility to be seen and to participate in chapter activities. For duty of loyalty, a board member puts the interest of the organization and its members first, ahead and above any personal interest. They have a duty to avoid and report any conflicts of interest. Duty of obedience defines that board members have an obligation to support all board actions, even if the board took a position that they did not endorse. Publicly, the board must speak with one voice. And finally, Duty of integrity outlines the responsibility to follow and adhere to all governance documents and to always act in a professional, respectful manner.
So why are the fiduciary duties important to the success of the board?
Well, they're important because they build trust, transparency, and respect, and they provide assurances to the membership that the chapter is being managed in their best interest.
When working with boards, can you share with us how you help them embrace these practices?
Based on our experiences working with international boards of directors, my team and I have put together some dramatizations of challenges that sometimes arise within boards that cause problems and should be avoided.
Let's review one now that relates to the duty of care.
Please put forth the motion to review and approve the financial report that was distributed prior to the meeting.
Sorry, I'm going to need a few minutes to review the documents. Last night, I was too busy and did not have time to review my email. I never thought we would be discussing this today. I feel terrible I have made everyone else wait. Scheduling time to prepare prior to each meeting keeps me in alignment with my responsibility to duty of care. Pre-planning ensures that I am coming prepared to participate and engage at chapter board meetings. Usually, I like to set up a standing meeting for myself, so I keep up to date on all chapter activities, not just those that I manage.
What a great reminder. How do board members react when a fellow board member is unprepared?
Board members are volunteers, and the time they devote to being a volunteer is precious, and it should never be wasted. When a board member is not prepared to participate, it infringes on the time of others, and it can lead to a poor volunteer experience where others might question whether the time they give is worth it.
And we will be right back later with our expert, Beatrice Heitler-Clevens from Springboard, with more on this special report. Up next in PMI's Chapter Kitchen, we have our top chef, Winston Piccola, sharing his recipe for success and biscuits. Stay tuned.
Ever wonder how the actions and processes of your board align with ethical behaviors? Do you stay up at night worrying about neglected or unrecognized ethical issues that could risk the stability of your chapter? Well, worry no more. The Chapter Board Ethics Assessment Tool allows boards to assess their performance as a team, understand how they approach and address ethical issues, and discuss potential gaps between their perceptions and how they adhere to the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. And all of this can be yours for no cost at all. To download the Chapter Board Ethics Assessment Tool and the other great resources in the Ethics Toolkit, log into the marketing portal today and search Ethics and Professional Conduct. Don't delay. Log in today.
I'm Winston Piccola, and I want to show you my secret for successful chapter management. It starts with the adoption and adherence to key documents. And just like in baking, if these documents are poorly written, outdated, or some of the language in one of the documents conflicts with another document, you can end up having a huge mess on your hands. Chapter governance can seem to be a mundane and boring task to some, but nothing is more critical than the board investing the necessary time to ensure that their documents are in order and comply with all the various chapter stakeholders. Let's start first with our governance ingredients. There are 5 key governance documents that represent the foundation of your chapter. All chapters need to become incorporated as a separate entity by the governing authority in their jurisdiction. Incorporation protects the members and the officers in the event of an adverse financial judgment levied on the chapter by some legal proceeding. Articles of incorporation represent a legal contract between the chapter as a separate entity and the governing body that grants corporate status. All PMI chapters are chartered by PMI, and they must renew their charters on an annual basis. The charter agreement represents a legal contract between your chapter as an entity and PMI as a separate entity. The charter describes the responsibilities of each entity has to one another. PMI chapters are expected to abide by the terms specified in the charter agreement, as well as abide by PMI policies included in the PMI Chapter Policy Manual. Chapter bylaws represent a contract between the chapter as an entity and the owners of the entity, the chapter members. The bylaws provide assurance to the members that the affairs of the chapter will be managed with their best interests in mind. Bylaws terms are often broadly written to allow the board of directors the flexibility to act on the members' behalf. Because they are broadly written, chapter bylaws often do not provide sufficient guidance to the board of how they are to fulfill the day-to-day fiduciary responsibilities to the members. The policy manual for PMI chapters provides information on new, updated, and existing policies. Whether you're a newly elected or appointed officer or have been a long-time PMI chapter volunteer, this information is important for PMI chapter volunteers to understand and adhere to these policies. Because the chapter bylaws are broadly written, it's recommended that the chapter board of directors develop written board policies. These policies represent an agreement among the board members themselves of how they will manage the affairs of the chapter and fulfill their responsibilities. Since they represent an agreement among the board policies can be changed at any time, as circumstances require, simply by the board deciding to change its policy. Board policies represent the wisdom of former boards being passed down to the current board. These policies describe situations that were encountered where sufficient guidance on how to act was absent. Poorly written governance documents, or none at all, is like having a bad recipe, or no recipe at all. The result can be confusion and a poor meal. These governance documents provide guidance for a board member to follow, so they can focus on member value and not have confusion and conflict among the board members themselves of how to manage the affairs of the chapter business. Governing documents guide you through all decision-making, your programs and initiatives, and help you in navigating situations that may arise in your chapter. Whether it's calling a special meeting or planning an event, be sure to consult all documents to provide guidance on how to proceed. Each governing document or ingredient is equally important. If there is conflicting information in two or more documents, some will supersede others or override them. The order is Chapters, Articles of Incorporation, PMI Chapter Charter Agreement, Chapter Bylaws, Policy Manual for PMI Chapters, and Chapters, Policies, and Procedures. It's just like when I make my biscuits. I know I need flour, butter, and milk. If I don't use the right amount of something or I forget the butter, my biscuits won't turn out. Now you might be wondering, where do you get examples of well-written governance documents, like getting the best quality ingredients for a great recipe? A general grocery store may not be the best location. Sometimes you need to go to a more reliable source, and that holds true for finding examples of key governance documents. Let's hear from our sponsor on how to best locate these critical documents.
Looking for help? We've got you covered. The new Volunteer Resource Center is your one-stop shop for access to helpful tools, such as the Component System, where you can find copies of your Articles of Incorporation, bylaws, and charter renewal information. The Community Leadership site, where you will be able to download the essential resources for chapter leaders, information on the Chapter Award Program, and much more. But don't limit your learning to online. If you need to revise your chapter bylaws, start with a conversation with your chapter administrator. Keep in mind, it's the chapter leader's responsibility to help develop new leaders coming into their role to ensure the knowledge transfer to their successor. Some chapter-specific information will be provided to you by fellow volunteers, just as you will pass on that knowledge when you finish your term for this new position.
And that's how you make these awesome biscuits. Back to you, Hudson. Wow, Chef, those are some great biscuits. Have you ever witnessed conflict among your fellow board members where there was a disagreement that became personal? Do you feel like there is no hope for a resolution and you're wondering why you've agreed to serve if this is an example of the volunteer experience? Potential conflict among board members has its roots in the passion volunteers bring to the organization. Volunteers care deeply, and this can stir up disagreement. You may experience this at any level, as a chapter leader or not. Your chapter shines when there is diversity of people and opinions, but sometimes emotions can run high and people can struggle with conflict. Your chapter partner and region mentor can help provide objective points of view, but in addition, PMI has an established conflict resolution program. The program outlines who should be involved, what the appropriate steps should be, and when and how a situation should be escalated. Let's hear from two leaders who got resolution thanks to the program.
The program helped offer clarity to enable us to resolve our problem. We realized we needed to focus on our members and not on our own issues.
The first step of conflict resolution is for the parties involved to meet and agree that their conflict is impacting the volunteer experience of the fellow board members, and eventually it'll have a negative impact on the member experience.
When it reaches this point, it becomes a board problem, one where the board might have to act if the conflict will eventually have an impact on the member experience. The board should contact their region mentor and their chapter partner, seeking some helpful guidance.
Yep. If the guidance provided by the mentor and chapter partner does not resolve the conflict, then the formal conflict resolution program is available to them.
Conflict is uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be ignored, and almost always, when handled professionally and maturely, conflict resolution will lead to an outcome that takes into consideration many points of view. If you're struggling with something within your chapter, the PMI Conflict Resolution Program can help to provide fair and objective points of view and a process to resolve an issue. For more information, contact your region mentor and chapter partner. We are back with our expert from Springboard, Beatrice Heitler-Clevens. Thank you for staying here with us.
Of course.
So there was another clip your team uses for board development. Let's share that now.
Okay, our first order of business is to review the RFPs for our web design.
Our chapter's website needs a total overhaul, and during the day, I'm a web developer. My company put in an RFP to my chapter, and if selected, my company would do an excellent job for the chapter, as we are already so familiar with what the chapter needs. But my obligation as a board member to the duty of loyalty is to always place the interests of the membership ahead of personal interests and to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of them. My company participated in the RFP process, and I alerted the board to my potential conflict of interest and recused myself from the decision-making process. That way, if my company was selected, we've avoided the negative perception of a conflict of interest.
What is the benefit to board members if this is handled correctly?
When a conflict comes up and the board handles it properly, this gives the board members the confidence to speak to chapter members about how board decisions are reached. It shows transparency and due diligence and ensures the board and the chapter's credibility.
And we will be back later with our expert, Beatrice Heitler-Clevens from Springboard, with more on the special report. The weather is always changing, and PMI Chapter News weather team wants to make sure you're ready. I'm PMI Chapter News Chief Meteorologist Gregory Rains. Stay connected as we track the path of core and extended services.
All chapters should have a records retention policy, so you don't end up holding on to more than you need, or neglecting to have an important document when you need it. For example, in the U.S., record retention and destruction policies are requirements of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Most people associate this act with the for-profit world, but the record retention and destruction policies are requirements of the act that apply to not-for-profit corporations as well. Find out more at the Volunteer Resource Center under the section Managing Chapter Finances and Administration.
It's the big question on everyone's mind this time of year. What's the outlook for the coming months? I'm PMI Chapter News Chief Meteorologist Gregory Rains. This is your Futurecast, so you know what to expect and what you need to do now so that you're prepared for any storms that may come your way. Now, before we look ahead at the coming months, maybe you are curious about the framework for chapter management. The catalog of core and extended services describes activities or products that chapters can deliver to provide value to members. The catalog is segmented into core services and extended services. Core services must be provided by the chapter to its members, while extended services are additional services that a chapter can provide to its members. For each service, there's a measure and a minimum level that the chapter must provide. Chapters are responsible for reporting against the metrics annually, beginning on their first charter anniversary. Now that you know what's expected, let's look at how you can be prepared for the year so you're ready for any storms that may come your way. First, we'll take a look at the deliverables that are date-driven, and then we will look at those that depend on your board's fiscal year and election cycle. Let's start with the annual charter renewal. Due on the 31st of March, the charter renewal process confirms that chapters have met PMI's minimum performance requirements. It collects information on chapters' prior year activities to ensure compliance with PMI policies. It requires that chapters verify to PMI annually that they have maintained their incorporated registered status. This process also requires that chapters verify that they have complied with all relevant governmental, tax, and filing requirements, including all national, federal, state, or provincial, and similar requirements. Chapter awards reward chapters that provide extraordinary member value. Submissions for those chapters that have been pre-qualified are due on the 30th of April. Will your chapter pre-qualify? Make sure your charter renewal is completed on time and in compliance. Also, make sure your chapter is meeting or exceeding average retention rates in the chapter's region. Finally, make sure your chapter is meeting or exceeding average scores for overall member satisfaction, likelihood to renew, and likelihood to recommend chapter membership as scored in the Membership Satisfaction Survey. And for U.S. chapters only, the chapter tax filing deadline is the 15th of May. Rain, sleet, slush, and snow. No matter what the weather, your chapter will be on the right track if you remember those deadlines. You've already heard about some of the core services, but let's take a closer look at some items whose dates are dependent upon the board's fiscal year and/or election cycle. We've got quite a list here. Elections, board transition and orientation, officer updates, policies and procedures, bylaw review, annual planning, and financial review. Annual elections are a requirement and integral part of the chapter's existence, so it is very important to promote the nomination and election process. It's important to ensure that the candidates have the opportunity to learn about the roles they may be interested in and qualify for. Once elected, new board members need the time to learn about the current state of their roles' obligations and the outgoing officer must ensure information has been transitioned. This orientation is just the beginning. After elections are complete, it's the responsibility of the chapter president or chair to update officers' listings within the PMI component system. This should be done following annual elections and once the new chapter leaders begin their terms to ensure continuity of leadership access to the records within the component system. Policies and procedures are necessary because they eliminate confusion, provides guidance, creates structure, and enforce uniform standards. Having these in place also simplifies volunteer leader onboarding and development. An important part of keeping a chapter vibrant and relevant is to review and edit its policies and procedures as necessary on an annual basis. Don't get caught in the rain with outdated policies. PMI strongly encourages chapters to review their existing bylaws every 3 years, or when the operations change. Don't forget, it's required that PMI reviews and approves the bylaws before the chapter's membership votes to approve them. And bylaws must be submitted in English for review and approval by PMI. The final piece of our Futurecast is annual planning. The chapter board determines the chapter's annual plans and goals and commits to meeting these objectives. The chapter needs to conduct a needs assessment and provide assurance that the necessary resources are being applied in order to deliver member value and meet the goals established by the board. Resources involve not only financial resources, but also human resources, your volunteers. As part of your annual review, you should also conduct your financial review. To really provide annual focus and alignment of your chapter leaders and volunteers, we recommend that you pick 2 to 3 initiatives to set your sights on and work together in an integrated manner to achieve your goals. Bear Garrison and Duffy Parson will be giving us more insight into annual planning later in the broadcast. Well, that's quite a lot, but these core services are integral in delivering value to your members. We are looking forward to a successful year with mostly clear skies ahead. Back to you, Hudson. Thank you, Gregory. Great information for chapter management. The Core and Extended Services tells you what you need to accomplish, and the annual charter renewal is a summary of what your chapter did for the previous year. All chapter leaders need to be familiar with the charter renewal. Part of your fiduciary responsibility is to know what is submitted. But do you know how to find your charter renewal? The component system is where you will find this, as well as many other important documents, like chapter contact information, chapter business records, chapter officers listing, and your chapter's geographic territory. Make sure you have access to the component system so you can review. And if you don't, contact your chapter president so they can provide it to you. And if you haven't logged in yet, be sure to log in today. This brings us back with our expert from Springboard, Beatrice Heitler-Clevens. Thank you for staying here with us.
My pleasure.
So here is another clip your team uses for board development. Let's share that now.
All in favor? All opposed?
I really want to talk about what just happened in there, but I can't. My responsibility to the duty of obedience prohibits me from discussing what happens in board meetings and to support the board decision, regardless of how I feel.
This can be a challenging one. Can you talk a bit about why this is important?
Well, I think everyone can relate to this, and we all know it's a challenge. What's duty of obedience? Simply put, as a board member, you endorse the board's decision, speak as one voice, and remember that what happens in the boardroom stays in the boardroom.
What can happen if this duty of obedience isn't followed?
Great question. It's important that the board speak with one voice. If not, it can trickle down to the membership and chapter volunteers, breaking down the credibility of the board and making it challenging to accomplish the chapter's core services.
And we will be back shortly with our expert, Beatrice Heitler-Clevens from Springboard, with more on this special report. Up next in sports, Bear Garrison and Duffy Parson give us an insider's look at annual planning. Stay tuned for interviews and highlights of the big event.
If you see or hear something going on in your chapter that violates PMI's Code of Ethics, could be harmful or illegal to the chapter or an individual, it is your obligation to report it. You have a responsibility to protect the chapter and to protect the integrity of the profession. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, signed into U.S. law in 2002, was the result of corporate wrongdoings and malfeasance that occurred in the late 1990s. This act requires for-profit and not-for-profit corporations to have a whistleblower policy. While this is a U.S. law, PMI stands behind this type of good governance. Make sure those willing to stand up to wrongdoings are protected. Make sure your chapter has a whistleblower protection policy.
Annual planning is one of the biggest events of the board. Welcome back. I'm Rufus Bear Garrison, and I'm Duffy Parson. The annual planning process addresses the strategic alignment to PMI, as well as the operational business objectives. The annual process needs to address both the current fiscal year, as well as providing direction for future years. Annual planning leads to enhanced member value. That leads to a positive member experience. It prepares the board and provides focus for the priorities that need to be accomplished when the new year begins. Right. You cannot win without a plan. For a plan to be effective, the chapter needs to fully investigate the challenges that they're facing. That is, identify the problems, identify the root causes of the problems, and develop solutions. And don't forget the expertise of your coaches. Your region mentor and chapter partner are going to help you along the way. The board seems in good shape for the annual planning meeting. I agree. Preparation can make or break this session. Earlier today, I talked with the coach to get a sense of how they prepared for this season's annual planning.
We are pulling out all of the stops for this one. We started by reviewing and really getting down to the nuts and bolts of the operation of the chapter. There are so many tools at our disposal, so we took a look at everything. The PMI strategic plan, the catalog of core and extended services, the chapter performance statistics, the business scorecard submitted with the annual chapter charter renewal, and the annual membership survey feedback. We also reviewed lessons learned from the chapter's previous plan and looked at feedback from members at events. It's like I always say, you win as a team, you lose as a team. And the pre-work for planning really determines if we win or lose at this annual planning.
And there you have it, folks. Pre-work is the key to setting the stage and helping to execute some of the big plays. We've got the whole board ready to give 110% today. So, Bear, what are we going to see today? Well, Duffy, this is a 4-part process. Identify business challenges, identify business objectives, build/modify the business plan, and then finally, implement the plan. So why do they need all of these steps? Good question. In the first quarter, we'll see them review the previous year's wins and losses. They will probably use one of their tried and true plays, the SWOT analysis. This helps the chapter leaders identify any threats. This strategic planning tool is used to discuss and clearly identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges for the chapter. That will tee them up for the second quarter, where they will look at the objectives for the year and get consensus on where they're headed. As we get closer to the middle of the event, or halftime, we should see them reviewing their annual plan to make sure their objectives are in alignment. Finally, I expect they'll be pulling out the budget. they're definitely going to want to make sure their plan is going to work within the budget. Looks like they're really getting into it now. Let's see what's going on. You were right on the money with your prediction. Looks like they're moving into a SWOT analysis. That's a really good call to help determine and narrow their focus. Oh, now their chapter partner is having them prioritize from there. What a great call. And now they're looking at the strategic plan to ensure they're in alignment. Good play. Focusing on the individual practitioners is really where they should be. Oh, dodged another one by tackling the budget. This team is really going for it this year. This annual plan is a hole-in-one.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, we really did our pre-work, and when we got in there, the team just dove into it. We prioritized from our SWOT analysis, focused on the objectives for the year, and made sure our plan was in alignment with the strategic plan and budget. Whew.
Thanks to the coach for that interview, and best of luck to everyone out there. Until next time, back over to you, Alex, with the final segment on the Fiduciary Duties Special Report. Thank you, Bear and Duffy. Beatrice Heitler-Clevens, thank you for staying here with us.
Thank you.
You've got one last clip on fiduciary responsibility. Let's share that now.
Well, it was a passionate discussion, and we had a difference of opinion, but we sorted it out with respect. We understand our obligations and how to comply within the guidelines for conduct for PMI chapter leaders and volunteers. These guidelines can be found on the Community Leadership site and describes the expectation of our roles as chapter leaders and volunteers. We believe that the credibility and reputation of PMI and its communities are shaped by the collective conduct of our chapter leaders and volunteers. It will assist us in making wise decisions, particularly when faced with difficult situations where we may be asked to compromise our integrity or values. Our board has made it part of our rules of engagement to treat each other fairly and with respect.
Duty of integrity requires that standard business practices must be followed in an ethical and honest manner, and that the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct be followed, ensuring all are treated fairly and with respect.
What an important message. So glad that you could join us today and share this with our viewers. Before we let you go, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, you've seen and heard the 4 fiduciary responsibilities of a board member: a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, and duty of integrity. These primary responsibilities, when followed, will help ensure the long-term success of your board and chapter.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
It was great to be here.
Thanks to Beatrice Heitler-Clevens for joining us. I'm Alex Brock, and that's the PMI Chapter News for today. For Hudson Briggs and all of us on the PMI Chapter News team, we hope your news is good news. Bye-bye.
Thank you for taking on your new roles.
Thank you for everything you do for PMI.
Gracias por participar como voluntaria PMI.
Thank you guys for being so awesome. You're the best.
Thank you for being a part of PMI.
Thank you for giving.
Thank you for making project management a priority.